welcome to this episode of the Wagging Tails podcast. I'm Fraser. Unfortunately, my co-host Jay is not with me today, but the topic I'm going to be tackling is naturally a follow-up from our last episode on male dogs. We are talking about female dogs. The topic being, should I spay my female dog? Now, that's not always a decision that you actually have, especially if you have adopted and depending on the country that you live in. So, what we are focusing on is how the spaying or not spaying impacts the dog's behaviour. I'm just going to make this very, very clear. We are not going to be talking about the medical side of things. That's not my expertise. I have never once claimed to be that knowledgeable on the medical side of things. It might be possible that we'll bring somebody on as a guest in the future to talk about the medical side. If that's something that people would be interested in, do let us know, drop us a message, comment, or even just send us a message on our page or website. And if enough people ask, yeah, we'll definitely be sourcing out a guest for that topic because it is something that is very important. Now, we're not going to be looking at medical, as I say. We're also not going to be looking at population control. We're not going to be looking at the rules of adoption or any of that stuff. We are literally going to be looking at your female dog's behaviour, what changes and what happens when you remove the hormones from the equations, or at least you reduce them dramatically. Now, male dogs and female dogs are very different in the same way that males and females and humans are very different in many ways. But this becomes even more apparent when we're talking about hormones. So we'll explore why the behavioural effects of spaying are unique as compared to neutering the male dogs. Now, if you haven't listened to the one on male dogs and you're more interested in your male dogs, because maybe you're like me and you only have male dogs, that might be something that you want to listen to, and that would be the last episode which we did a couple of weeks ago. So, if you have been considering spaying your female dog, or if you're wondering what it could mean for her behaviour, this episode is definitely worth a listen. Okay, so, cracking on, let's kick things off with how the heat cycle in female dogs works. Now, I'm going to try not to get too nerdy about this, but it will mean that I'll be going into some technical aspects. So I do hope that everybody enjoys that side of things. So the female dogs go through an erogenous cycle or a heat cycle, which is very different from male reproductive cycles. And one of the biggest things to remember about our domestic dogs is that they evolved from wolves. Now, a lot of the time when we speak about behaviour, we actually separate this a little bit because there is quite a long evolution. Not 40,000 years is the most recent estimate of when domestic dogs start, or when wolves started to join human tribes. But in this case, it's very, very important because wolves live in family groups, not dominance-based packs like old TV shows and unfortunately, some modern documentaries and trainers would have you believe. That's not the way that works. It's a family group. And the goal of that family group is to grow, to protect pregnant females, to keep the family safe. This is very, very important, and it's a collective requirement. And that's actually why the hormones work together. And we get the same in humans a little bit as well. So female dogs will actually do similarly to what female humans will do if they live in the same household, is they will mirror their heat cycles. They start syncing up with other females in the same group. Now, this is believed to help synchronize the family dynamics, which is also why it's believed to happen with humans as well. And it's to maximize safety of the pregnant females and the babies, or the pups in this case. So when all the hormones are all firing, the protective hormones are not just with one female, it's with the group, which means they're going to be more defensive, which we'll touch on a little bit later on. Now, interestingly enough, something similar happens to the males in the group. Now, This doesn't necessarily happen to the same degree in humans, but it has been shown to happen somewhat, which is interesting. And it does happen when you've got a very close couple and the female of the couple is pregnant. And that is the male testosterone level starts to increase when there are pregnant females in the family. So guys, if you do have a pregnant female in your family and you think that's happening, get yourself into the gym and make the most of it. So back to the thing at hand here. That heat cycle is not just about reproduction, it's about maintaining harmony within that family group. Okay, but it does impact the behavior somewhat. So during this heat cycle, female dogs experience a significant change to their behavior due to the hormone fluctuations, primarily estrogen, progesterone, and after the actual heat cycle, this is when progesterone in particular stays and elevates for about 2 months after the heat. Now, this is where it's very different between humans and dogs, is when a female dog goes into heat, it's actually effectively, like a comparison would be like they're going through the full first trimester of pregnancy, whereas females and humans don't do that, which means that this progesterone is kicked up for at least 2 months, roughly around about 2 months after the heat, which is mimicking being pregnant. Now, this hormone is effectively what so many people would so affectionately call the mummy bear hormone, the one that makes animals, including humans, that little bit more defensive, that little bit more protective. And it's very, very important because it does keep her as a pregnant animal and the cubs, pups, babies safer when they have been born. So this is why, for example, female dogs can become a lot more pessimistic, a lot more guarded. So resource guarding can be a lot more prominent a couple of months after a heat. And in some cases, they can become more reactive in general. So that's something that we need to be aware of. So let's break that down just a little bit further. During heat, your female dog is experiencing surges of testosterone, which can result in increased energy. It can be increased agitation and sometimes restlessness and even anxiety, which if you've already got an anxious dog, can make it quite challenging for them. In some dogs, it can make them more affectionate, or she might become withdrawn, depending on the individual personality. Yes, that does sound somewhat similar to some females in the human element that you might know, because the hormones are quite similar. So after the heat, this is when the rise in progesterone that changes things quite dramatically between the dogs and the humans. This is the hormone associated with pregnancy, even when the dogs are not pregnant, as I mentioned just earlier. And this is the one that makes them prone to resource guarding, potentially reactivity, and being very protective of their environment. So this is what people sometimes refer to as false pregnancy behaviors. So some dogs can even start nesting, hoarding their toys, or showing some real signs of preparing for a family, which can come across as quite aggressive and reactive in some cases. So on top of that, because this is effectively mimicking a pregnancy, they can also experience what we would call morning sickness. And this is not actually the pregnancy, this is driven by the hormonal changes. But as you can imagine, well, for me, I need to imagine it, but for a lot of our female listeners, I'm sure you don't need to imagine it, you've probably experienced it. That morning sickness makes you a lot more agitated, makes you not as keen to be around people, or you don't really want to socialize as much. You just kind of want to just chill out, just relax. So this can be very challenging for female dogs experiencing that, especially in multi-dog households or if you've got multiple female dogs in particular, because then if they're all experiencing it at the same time, that could create some conflict. And indeed, if you've got a family with young children and a female dog feeling this way, that makes it particularly challenging and also somewhat dangerous. So we need to be aware of that as well. So during this time, you may see some more tension or even conflicts between the female dogs during the heightened hormonal state. So these are the changes that you've got to look out for. First of all, we understand that it's perfectly normal for female dogs in heat, in the months following heat, to become more reactive and more protective. So you can't get irritated or annoyed at your dogs for this. You know this is happening. It's something that we understand. So on top of that, these are the bigger things that I just listed off, but you've got to be aware that this also can create things like more noise sensitivity or more sensitivity to people approaching her space, sensitivity to light, sensitivity to movement. Things that might not normally have bothered her on her walk might all of a sudden be bothering her. A lot of the time we get people contacting and saying, oh, my female dog's all of a sudden becoming more reactive and not enjoying her walks as much. And when we ask the question, when was her last heat? They say, oh, it finished last month. Well, that makes a lot of sense, and of course, we should be trying to help her and help her not experience things in that way. But we certainly wouldn't want to be doing a hardcore behavioural modification program if the reason for those behaviours is because she's not feeling so great, It wouldn't be fair. The last thing any of us would want is to be getting put through the rigor of having to learn new things and go through different exercises when we're not feeling very well. So this is very, very important to understand. If you have multiple female dogs in the house, and this is where I'm missing Jay a little bit, because he's got his two girls in his house. This is when it's crucial to watch for any signs of tension, because fights can happen during this time, even when they normally get along. And one thing, oh, I can't remember the name of the study. I am sorry. I'll try and find it and I'll put it in the notes. But there's an interesting study about how serious fights can be between multi-dog households. So they looked at all male multi-dog households, all female multi-dog households, and mixes. And effectively, the results went as follows. You're going to be more likely to get more regular spats with an all-male household, but they're not going to be that serious. It's kind of like boys will be boys kind of thing. I know that's a horrible term, but like they might hurt each other a little bit and then they're back to being best friends very, very quickly. Then it's your all female multi-dog households that had fewer fights, but the fights were more serious when it did happen and they lingered longer. So these disagreements can linger over days. And then the most peaceful households were the mixes between male and female. So that was an interesting study, which I will do my best to try and find again. It was a while ago that I did read that one. But fights can happen with any multi-dog household. I would advise anybody that's wondering about multi-dog households to go back and listen to that episode on our podcast, which is titled Multi-Dog Household. I can't remember which episode it is, but it is there and it is a good listen. So even if your female dogs are best friends, their behaviour can change when these hormones are involved. And you may see more possessiveness. You may see irritation over small things, simple things like who gets to sit next to you on the couch, or who gets up on the couch first, or whose meal gets put down first. So you're going to want to help them mitigate any of these issues at all if you notice anything. Okay. Now, we will be talking about how to help the dogs and we'll go into the potentials of why or why not you should or should not spay. But I'm going to try and do something which I may not do as well as I would like. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Jay's dogs, because with my boys, we've only had two spats. One of the reasons that we successfully had so few was the age difference, because we staggered the age difference of the boys and we staggered when we got them fairly successfully. Now, the benefit of that being that one dog can then be slightly older than the next, but also you've had time to train and shape that dog's behavior before you get the next. Jay, he he adopted Blue, was working on Blue, did a great job with Blue, brought Ori in. Okay, so he did stagger the times that they had been with him. So Blue came first, a few years later, then it was Ori. But they're the same age. So it meant that there was that little bit more tension with the residual hormones that these girls were feeling, even though they had already been spayed. Because just because they've been spayed doesn't mean that the hormones are completely gone. And he did get certain times where there was a lot of tension, times where they were best friends. So he's got a little bit of management to do in the early stages, where he had to keep them separate at certain times. Meal times had to be separated. He had to very strictly work on things like individualized beds. So when he sends the girls to their beds at night or to their places for control, it was very much a case of this one's Blue's bed and this one's Ori's bed. Whereas in our household, it can be a little bit more fluid because the boys aren't as possessive of their beds, even though they do have their preferred beds. So there's certain things that Jay had to do to make sure that he was controlling things with his dogs. And then over time, and with that control, of course, the girls start to get on a lot more and these sort of things fizzle out. But that was just a little bit about Jay's dogs. That would have been much better if Jay had been here. But don't worry, I'm sure that was the gist of it. And what we might ask is if Jay later on wants to share a little bit about that, we might get him to write a little article on it so that people can go onto the website and read it. Okay, so how do we help our female dogs who are going through these hormonal changes? And as I said with Blue and Ori, with Jay's dogs, it's all about management. It's making sure you're giving your dog plenty of space and you're reducing those potential triggers. If you've got multiple dogs, supervise them more closely, preventing conflict. You might need to separate them when they're unsupervised, like when you're leaving the house or when you're sleeping at night or when you're feeding them, just to sort of avoid any kind of conflict. The other thing that basically this should be something that everybody thinks about. The first thing you should think when your dog is behaving differently, well, the first thing is actually, is my dog healthy? So if there's anything, you should always ask yourself, we need to get a vet check, make sure there's nothing going on with the dog before we go down any other routes. But the next thing you should be thinking about is my dog getting enough physical and mental stimulation? These are things like puzzle toys, scent games, structured play, things that can keep their focus for longer so that they are getting more mental exercise. So training itself is brilliant for this. You've also got to look at physical exercise. So what are the walks they're getting? Are they getting any exercise other than walks? Because they definitely should be, whether that be playing games with toys or whether it be going sniffari and letting them really get stuck in about things and sniffing. This kind of thing will dramatically decrease their stress or frustration. The other thing that you need for anything when you're working with dogs or children for that matter is you need a lot of patience. So understand that your dog isn't acting this way on purpose. They're not being stubborn. They're not being awkward. It's just about their hormones, and it will pass after the cycle ends. And when I say the cycle, I mean after not just the heat, but after the few months after the heat as well. But then this raises the question, if it's that challenging, what about spaying? Would spaying the female dogs remove these behavioural issues completely? Well, this is when it comes down to, if you remove the hormonal fluctuations, which are part of the cycle, you might not need to worry so much about that 2-month period of heightened reactivity or guarding. However, it is not a magic fix, the same as it was when we were talking about male dogs last time. So, depending on how long that female dog has been experiencing these hormonal influxes, it can become learned behaviours. So, if your dog has got used to that fluctuation in their behaviour due to those hormones, it can become something that's ingrained in their behaviour, which means that the dog may have learned to be more possessive, protective, reactive. So behaviour modification and training and effectively changing those neurological pathways is necessary. Now, this is where it would have been nice for Jay to tell you firsthand on how he did that. Of course, I know how he did it, but it'd be nicer to hear from somebody that had to do it with their own dogs. I always feel that it's great coming from the perspective of a behavioural consultant or a trainer, but nobody understands the process quite as deeply as somebody that's actually had to do it with their own dogs. And if you've got somebody who is a behavioural consultant and or trainer, and they've done it in their own household, that's even better because they've got a deeper understanding of what they were going through. But I know that when Jay got Ori, she had been spayed as well as Blue had already been spayed, but there had been behavioural learnings in there. So a lot of the behaviours of guarding and the pessimism had actually become ingrained because of the length of time and the number of heat cycles they'd gone through. So he had to end up building a lot more confidence, playing a lot more concept games with them, a lot of trust building, because when they were feeling unsure and when they were feeling like things were a bit dodgy or they needed to guard things or they needed to get possessive, or even if they just felt a little bit reactive, them trusting Jay to that level is super important. So when Jay tells them that everything is okay and they can relax and that he's the one that's looking after everything and they don't need to worry about this, they understand that he is telling the truth and they will relax. If you don't have that trust built up, it's very challenging. And you do that through different exercises, games, and training. First of all, the ones that I always start people off with are simple ones like the orientation game, simple ones like ensuring that when you're taking them out on your walks, you're giving them as much freedom as possible, but you're also making sure you're guiding them appropriately to keep everything safe and comfortable. You're doing defensive maneuvers on the walk so that if they're getting spooked by something, you're always going to be blocking the potential trigger. And they notice all of this, they see all of this, and it builds your trust. You're putting emotional deposits in that relationship bank account and building that up so that you've got a great amount in there. That's really, really important when it comes to this. Then you can start looking at behavioural adjustment training and actually giving the dogs alternative behaviours when they feel the need to become reactive, protective, possessive, guarding, or any of the other things that you might be experiencing. So that's what I know that Jay had to go through when he dealt with Ori and Blue when he got them together. And I know that because we were working together at the time, and obviously when it's your own dogs, you don't want to just write your own dog's training programs, you want to bounce it off somebody else. I never recommend to anybody writing their own programs for their own dogs because you're always going to be a bit biased. It's the same way like if you write your own training program for the gym, you're going to pick and choose the exercises that you find easiest. So you're not really going to be challenging yourself. And when you do it with your own dogs, it's somewhat similar. So when it comes to spaying, let's say you decide to spay, timing is very, very important. So you don't want to be doing it when your dog is in heat or immediately post-heat afterwards. Because if you do that when the progesterone is high, that ends up becoming her baseline when she underwent the surgery. So to reduce complications and to help the behaviour stabilise afterwards, you want her to be in a very hormonally stable place when you do this. So this is when you need to understand that if you do spay in the middle of these hormonal surges, you might end up seeing a continuation of these reactive behaviours. It's almost as if they get stuck in that hormonal behavioural state. And that's not actually what's happening. It's just taking a lot longer for it to settle down because of the baseline that she was in when that change happened. But it does create a lot more challenges when you do the behaviour rehabilitation and modification, and it will take longer. And every dog is different. So you've got to weigh out the pros and the cons based on your own dog's personalities. So in the same way that with humans, some girls you barely notice if they're going through their cycle, and then others you know very, very clearly. And coming from a very matriarchal family, like I do, you can see the difference in the different ladies within the family. And don't worry, I'm not going to mention names for anybody that's in my family watching this, but yeah, my family is, I was going to say was, but still is very matriarchal. We've got a lot of very, very strong women in our family, and you can see the differences, and they'll be the first ones to admit that. So I'm not saying anything that's overly challenging or strange, but dogs are the same. So if your dog doesn't have those behavioral fluctuations as badly during the cycles, then you can start to think about more other areas that you're wanting to look at. And these are the ones that I'm not going to touch on, which are the medical side of things. So there's different elements that will potentially go wrong or go better, whether they've been spayed or whether they've been not spayed. So I'll not touch too heavily on that one, but if you are interested in it, as I said, let us know and we will find somebody to jump on as a guest to talk more about that. You've got to look at your dog's own behaviour. If your dog does have these fluctuations, monitor the timing, okay? Because it could be that your dog is just reactive. It might not have as much to do with the hormonal changes. And if that's the case, then you can look at the idea of, okay, do we need to look at spaying, or is it more of a behavioural modification job here? And of course, you've got things like, do you have to spay them for legal reasons, whether it be that you got them from a breeder that requires it, or from a charity organisation that insists that they get spayed at a certain age? These are all things that you've got to take into account. But like the boys, if that is the case, I would monitor their behaviour and I would strongly ask for extensions or whatever you feel is necessary based on your individual dog's personality, behaviour, and the impact that the hormone fluctuation is having on them, so that you are spaying at the correct time, if that's what you have chosen to do. Okay, so just to wrap this one up, I know this one's been a slightly shorter one, but spaying on your female dogs can certainly have an impact on behaviour. But again, the same with neutering, it's not a cure-all. You cannot expect to spay your female dog, to neuter your male dog, and bang, think that the behaviour is going to be absolutely fine after that. That's not how it works. So we need to be aware of that. You can't be disappointed. Female dogs experiencing hormonal changes during their heat cycles, which can affect their mood, reactivity, and guarding. It might be reduced, but it may not go away completely, especially if they've been through quite a few different cycles and it has become a behavioural learned experience or a learned behaviour, excuse me. So, important to know that if these behaviour sets are only happening during those times, they are temporary, and with the right management and training, you can help her through them. If you do decide to spay, make sure you're doing it at the right time. Make sure you're talking to your vet. Look at the medical side of things. As much as I'm not talking about them right now, it's very much worth looking at that side of things as well. But don't do it just because of behavioural problems. Speak to your vet. If you're experiencing behavioural problems, speak to a behavioural consultant. Training and understanding your dog's individual needs will be the most effective route to changing these behaviours. Okay? And with that, I will leave it there. I know that I rattled through that one quite quickly. One of the reasons being because I was by myself. But I do hope that you found that interesting. And I do hope that it's helpful for those of you that have got young female dogs and you're considering spaying, or for those that just want to understand things a little bit more when it comes to behaviour and spaying and hormones. Because if you go online, you will find more than enough information on medical, but very few things on the actual behaviour. Okay? So, without further ado, we will end that topic there. Before we go, I just want to give a few little updates. Our next episode will be in 2 weeks. We will post out what that topic is going to be in due time. We'll be doing that very soon. So keep an eye out for that one. If you want to listen to that one live, jump onto our Facebook. Every time we do these, we are recording them for the podcast, of course, but we also do them live on Facebook for those that want to be part of that as well. We also have a few things coming up to look out for, so please follow us on Instagram and on Facebook to look out for these. On the 2nd of November, we will be attending the Buddy Bites charity event, which has a number of different things going on to raise money for a number of different animal welfare groups in Singapore. So if you're in Singapore, please come down and see us on the 2nd of November. It's from 12 p.m. till 6 p.m. During that time, there's a lot to see, a lot to do. There's giveaways. We've got giveaways. There's also going to be a seminar on scent games with your dogs, which personally I'm really looking forward to, because I look at the behaviour of dogs so much that I sometimes forget to look at the more fun things, like doing more advanced scent games. Because although we do scent games as part of the behavioural set, we don't do it to a massively advanced level. And when you do things like man trailing, where the dogs actually have got to find a person that's hiding in a forest or in a field or things like that, it's absolutely amazing. And I love being part of things like that. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing that on the 2nd. We will also be doing a seminar on dog walking, because a lot of people that you see around don't actually walk their dogs as effectively as they could be. So we're going to be going through that, making sure people know how to be walking their dogs properly. We're going to be taking you on a guided walk where everybody that's part of it is going to be going on the walk, and we will be giving you training advice. We will be having 2 stations. We will be teaching you different actions, different exercise, and different movements to improve your dog's walk so that things can be a lot more enjoyable for both you and your dog. So please come for that one. There is a small fee for that. All of the money that gets raised during that event goes to the animal welfare groups and shelters. So please do come down and support that. So that's Buddy Bites at 1 Holland Village, the dog-friendly mall. Look out for that both on our Facebook, our Instagram stories, Buddy Bites Instagram, and I'm sure you'll see it floating around as well. And I really hope to see some of you there. We also are going to be starting some free seminars at OMD, that's Oh My Dog, which is a dog-friendly cafe and bar at 12 East Coast Road. It's just below Doggy Retreat, which is a daycare. Great little bar. Means you can sit inside in the aircon, your dog on the sofa beside you with a pint or a coffee or whatever you want to be having. Highly recommend going down and checking it out anyway, but it's what we're going to be doing there, which is more important. So, hello, Princess. Hi, you going to come say hi to everybody?
Yeah.
Okie doke. So we are going to be doing some bar talks, effectively seminars, giving people information that they might find useful for their dogs or for their own information. I do find this very funny that you're dressed up as a princess. The first thing we're going to be talking about is the importance, don't touch the mic, we're on live, the importance of preparing your dogs and teaching your children to be respectful of the dogs. So this is so that you can have a much more harmonious environment between your children and your dogs, which ironically, if you're watching, you can see this happening right now. So you can see that Freya doesn't shout and scream when the dogs are getting close. She's been taught to be a little bit more quiet and respectful towards the dogs when they come up to her. And that's going to be one of the topics. We're also going to be talking about reactivity, and we'll be talking about a lot of different topics. But we also have a few guest speakers that are going to be coming up, one of which, Freya, am I going to have to do some jiu-jitsu on you to keep you from grabbing things? We've also got somebody from the Royal Animal Rescue coming in to talk about doggy first aid. So that seminar will give people the very basics of doggy first aid and the importance of that. And we will be having a PhD animal nutritionist, Dr. Francis Cabana, coming in to do a talk. And he'll be talking about canine nutrition and the importance of making sure that your dog is getting the best that they can be. So look out for those coming up on our social media pages. You'll see the dates and the information there. And we would love it if you would come and join us. We'll also have a few more courses coming up, so take a look out for our group courses. Over November, December, we're going to be having more shorter ones on walking, on reactivity. We're going to be having a first aid course and things along those lines, as well as our puppy courses and our back to basic adult courses, which helps you retrain or brush up on things that your dog may be missing from their training from when they were younger. So have a look about those all over our Instagram and Facebook, and sign up or join us for the free ones when you see them. With that said, guys, if you feel like supporting this podcast even more than you already do, please consider joining our Patreon. And with that, we will see you next time on the Wagging Tails podcast. Say goodbye, Freya. Bye.
Bye.